Hello, everyone. It's Athena, and I'm so happy to be back with you all after my beautiful and enlightening 2-month journey in Greece to study the ancient Greek mystery traditions in depth. And I know that many of you have been waiting on some big reveals, and as I continue to translate some of the texts that I was able to procure from Greece, as well as a lot of the symbolism I found at some ancient abandoned temples and conversations with many knowledgeable people. I certainly plan to make content specifically related to that. And today I will also discuss some fundamental elements of the things that came from my trip in Greece. But as a preparatory to studying the Greek mystery traditions and their impact to the Western mystery traditions, as well as to the practices of modern magic and even practices such as manifestation, I wanted to start out with a video series related to magical formula. The reason for this is because being able to understand magical formula is highly critical, in my opinion, to not only being able to understand the traditions, but to being able to understand why spiritual practices work. And that allows us to move out of the realm of things like dogma and faith and into a realm of confidence where that we can, directly utilize in our practices to be confident that they're working and to recognize why they're working and also to recognize why they may not be working. So the first thing, though, that I want to cover isn't something from the mystery traditions necessarily, but something from modern science, which I have leaned always very heavily on. And the reason for this is because I studied for a long time neuropsychology. And one of the things that came out of that for me when I was young was an understanding of how the brain and its morphology, as well as the neural connections that are made over time, affects consciousness. I've always been fascinated with the idea of consciousness and reaching higher states of consciousness, the ideas of human excellence. And to me, in my 20s, I came to a realization that it was consciousness that really drives so much of how we function in the world, how we understand and perceive things, as well as the ability to achieve things that other people can't. If we think about individuals that just excel above and beyond what the normal person could, and you listen to interviews with them or read their writings, one of the things that is a main theme is how they've developed their consciousness. And also, when you begin to learn how to extract an understanding of the experiences of higher states of consciousness, you can see within their writings and in their interviews and speeches verbiage that relates to them achieving higher states of consciousness, such as one-pointed awareness or samadhi, where they're completely immersed within whatever the activity is and essentially functioning at a higher state of consciousness that really gives them an edge. And we see this with Olympians, for example. We see this especially with geniuses. I took some time to study the quality and state of consciousness of people from Mensa, and noticed that that this was a common theme, was their ability to tap into higher states of consciousness. And we see this with many of our genius scientists throughout history, such as Albert Einstein, Sir Isaac Newton, Poincaré, Galileo are just some examples of people who are living in these higher states of consciousness and subsequently also were very dedicated to their own spiritual paths as well. A lot of people are unaware of this, but the bulk the majority of Sir Isaac Newton's writings and works were actually on alchemy and mysticism and not on mathematics and physics. But it's my personal perspective that because he was so heavily immersed in these mystical traditions, it gave him the ability to be able to perceive things that the normal human consciousness just doesn't have the ability to grasp. And for those of us, who maybe struggled with physics and math in school, the ideas that are expressed in mathematics and physics are so abstract. It's hard to, for the analytical mind to wrap itself around that. We almost have to make a leap into a more flexible state of consciousness, which is a quality of these higher states of consciousness, this mental flexibility, in order to be able to really grasp math and physics. So going back to neuroplasticity and how it relates to magic and mysticism, neuroplasticity, again, is the ability of the mind to transform its shape over time. It's a physical transformation within the brain, and it happens due to a stimulus that occurs. And we experience this mostly in terms of our habits. When we have a bad habit, for example, like smoking, it's very difficult for us to break it. And scientific evidence has shown that the chemical dependency on cigarettes and other sources of nicotine actually is gone from our body within about 72 hours. It's the habit. It's the habit of doing it in social environments, or when we wake up, or when we have coffee. It's this habit that if you smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, you're doing this 100 times a day. The habits create neural bundles, because every time you do something, a new neural connection is created, and many neural connections create a bundle that has to atrophy over time, and it can take a long time, many years, for those neural bundles sometimes to atrophy, depending on the habit that we have. And we also know that when we begin to formulate new habits, we have to engage in a repetitive process. And we see this mimicked in magical and mystical traditions within particular formulas. For example, when we're performing an invocation, you may note that there are certain lines within an invocation that are said over and over again. The purpose of this is not only to help activate the emotional component within us, but also it creates those neural connections. For those of you who are studiers of the Golden Dawn magical system, MacGregor Mathers had a very famous saying, invoke and invoke often. Why? Because daily invocation, daily spiritual work that's performed in repetition, molds and transforms the physicality of the mind. And when the brain begins to change its physical form, we perceive things differently. And that allows us to achieve higher states of consciousness. If you perform the middle pillar as another example, repetition is a part of the key fundamental formula of that. And many people think about it just as this way to help empower that particular practice or that technique. And yes, that is one component, is allowing yourself to be immersed within the energy. But why does it work? It works because it changes our physical brain and allows for us to become more connected to that energy and to perceive things differently as our brain changes shape. So I want to drive that home for people so that individuals can understand how critical and crucial it is when you're engaging in any type of spiritual practice, why practice on a regular basis is important, and how it actually changes your perspective of things. And we see this also in other areas of magical formula as they relate to things such as speech and vibration. which, vibration fundamentally changes everything. Our universe is founded on vibration. If you study quantum physics, you'll note that it's been widely determined amongst the scientific community that everything is based on vibration. And that's what makes music so powerful in tapping into our subconscious and allowing for us to express our emotions. But scientific evidence has shown that music and vibration are most impactful in changing our brain over time. And this is one of the reasons why vibration is utilized as part as overall magical formula, especially in high magic systems or chanting or song, things which engage that musical component or that vibratory component within us. It helps increase the transformation of our consciousness over time. If you do a cross analysis of the mystical traditions throughout the world, you'll notice that, in the beginning of the mystical practices that you'll learn, I'll take the eight-limbed path of yoga as an example. The first few phases or steps or grades or whatnot focus primarily on training the mind and purifying the body, which both impact the physicality of the brain and prepares it and hones it. Practices which come, later, such as honing your will, for example, all are founded on the ability of the brain to be able to hold a particular state of consciousness for a prolonged period of time. And that comes with repetition and practice and becomes solidified when the brain has changed its morphology to a significant extent. So I want you to consider that fundamental really to the practices that we do as magicians, as mystics, that the reason these things are working is because it's physically changing our brain. It's essentially changing the coding in our central processing unit that allows us to then wake up to other extrasensory perceptions and to develop things like astral senses as we become more and more sensitive. When your brain has been trained to think about things in a certain way, and then you retrain your brain to think about things a different way or to perceive things a different way, then you're able to immerse yourself more fully within that. And I'll just leave you with a final example of that: language. Many of us know that if we want to learn language, or if we want to teach our children language, the best time to teach children language is when they're young, before their brain, while their brain is literally molding itself, right? The brain, when we're first born, is open to every experience, but it begins to kind of, as it changes morphology based on the stimulus and environment, the human body doesn't use what it doesn't need. So it will start to atrophy to certain sounds and hone itself to pick up the ones that it's perceiving in the environment more effectively and efficiently. And this is why it's much more difficult when you're an adult to learn languages, because your brain, literally, it's difficult to hear the sounds of a foreign language because the brain has to reformulate itself with new neural connections over time. And so as you gain more and more experience with that, then you're able to perceive that more. And it's the same thing in magical, mystical, and spiritual practices. As we gain more experience with the energies, that stimulus, we engage in the practices, it refines our brain so we can perceive them more. And this is how we begin to become more and more skilled in these particular practices. So I was going to touch on maybe some other elements of magical formula in this video, but I think I want to keep the each video in the series a little short and easy to digest. So check out my next video in which I will continue on with our series in magical formula. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have a beautiful day. Love you guys.